Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. I have a Christmas card for you using the Hero Arts Kit of the Month, that's what it's called. So get comfy, let's get crafty. So this is how the kit came, packaged in this little zipper bag, which is super cool. It's totally reusable. I have some of these in my craft room already and I love them. And the first thing that pops out of this bag are two white ink pads. One is the Hero Hues Pigment Ink in Unicorn White, and the other is the Hero Hues Reactive Ink in Sea Salt. The first stamp is this Falling Snow rubber cling mount stamp set. And this is the stamp set for the kit of the month. This is from October 2022, by the way. And it has a coordinating die set for all of the sentiments and stamped images in this stamp set. We'll talk about the card in a minute. I'll explain that in just a minute. There's also 2 half sheets of this blue cardstock. So basically 1 sheet of blue cardstock cut in half already. And then a kind of opalescent white and this silver glimmer. And then I purchased a couple of other stamp sets. This one is called Holiday Sentiment Strips, and it coordinates with that strip die, the sentiment strip die. And then I have the Happy Holidays foil plate and die set. And then because I ordered a lot of things, Hero Arts tossed in this Christmas trees and animal stamp set. I also purchased a couple of stencils, snowflakes and sweater weather or something like that. So we are going to, or I want to kind of create a fun fold card. Now I'm not going to get quite as fancy as this card. But I am going to have a flap that flips up in the bottom, and I want to use this pine bough stamp and die. I did have to do a little bit of experimenting to figure out exactly which way I needed to stamp this pine bough or pine branch and on the paper and get the die cut. So I have a piece of, this is like a card base size piece of cardstock, A2 size card base, and I scored it in the middle as if I was going to use this as my card base, because if it worked out, I was going to. But I did need to do a little bit of experimenting, and my plan is to have this pine branch be the flap that flips up the bottom. And yeah, I'm not explaining that very well. Kind of a trifold card with the pine bough being the bottom flap. But I was pretty sure that the way I thought I needed to put the pine branch in was wrong. And so I decided to just experiment first and figure it out. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm figuring out how the die lines up with the stamp, first of all, and then which direction I think I need to stamp this in to create the flap on the bottom, it's kind of a lopsided gatefold. And so instead of using the actual card base, I just pulled in this card panel size piece of cardstock that was on my desk as well. And the first thing I'm going to do is ink this up with some green ink. I'm using the Altenew Evergreen ink. And I'm going to position this stamp along the bottom of this card panel with the flat edge of the stamp against the bottom edge of my cardstock. Guess what? That's wrong. Because once I got it inked up and laid the stamp or the die on it, I realized, oh, that's going to cut out and make the top cut out, and the bottom's just going to be cut off. So I decided to stamp this again. I lined up the open edge with the bottom edge of my cardstock, and I flipped it over so that I would remember which side was the correct way. But also, if it turns out good, I can use it again, right? And I'm going to ink that up with that evergreen ink again and make sure that it's lined up nicely on the edges. It does take the whole front of a card, so it is 4 1/4 inches across. I did decide to go ahead and double stamp this just in case I ended up using this panel. I didn't, because I went another direction once I knew what I was trying to accomplish, which you'll see in just a minute. So then I needed to put the die on the stamped image for 2 reasons. I wanted to see how to align it properly, but also I'm trying to create, again, that bottom flap of a gatefold style kind of sort of card. So I'm just going to tape this die in place with some blue low-tack tape. And I have a panel that has this notched out, what appears to be top of the panel, right? And I did need to trim that panel down. It was slightly wider than 4¼ inches, so the stamp did not take up the entire front of the card. So I'm going to place this in my scoreboard, and I'm going to create 2 score lines because I don't know what I want to do. The first score line is going to be right along the bottom of the stamped image. And then first thing I'm going to do is fold that and press it down with my bone folder. And I like how it looks, but I feel like it's a tiny little flap. So I pulled out that card base again, and I'm just experimenting with how I would attach it. And it is a tiny little flap. So I decided to kind of rub that score line out with my bone folder. And I'm going to lay this on the front of my card and put a pencil mark on this panel that I have the stamped bough pine branch on, and then make a new score line. So there are pluses and minuses to this. This creates a taller flap on the bottom of the card, but it leaves a lot of unstamped area. Now, looking at it now, that could be a good thing if you wanted a place to position a sentiment, like maybe a bigger sentiment. When I was putting this card together, I didn't really love the look of that. Another way to offset that would be to have stamped it again in the opposite direction and just folded the curved line underneath. So while I don't love the small flap as much as I like the taller flap, I like how it looks better. So I am going to go ahead and pull in this dark green cardstock card base. I contemplated using the card base and the white stamp, the white paper that I've stamped that pine bough on, but I don't love that either. So I'm trying to figure out how to make this work. And the reason I left all of this stuff that didn't work for what I was trying to do in was so you can see my process and maybe perfect it your way better, right? You figure out what I did that I did the hard way, and you do it easier. That's why we do this, right? To help each other out. So I still am not loving the white cardstock. So I decided to go ahead and pull out that green panel of cardstock again, and I'm going to restamp that pine branch on this green cardstock. Now, it's not going to have a very dramatic or detailed effect if I stamp this green on green or black on green, and it is a silhouetted image. So I decided to heat set it. I'm going to heat set it with gold embossing powder. So the first thing I need to do is realign the stamped image the proper way, which is technically upside down, I think, onto my card panel. And I am going to put the stamp on my MISTI lid, and then I'm going to treat my cardstock with the anti-static powder tool from Rabbit Hole Designs. This is their, I think it's called the Cottontail powder tool or something. It just prevents the embossing powder from sticking to anything but the ink. Then I'm going to ink up this stamp with my Versamark ink. This is a watermark ink. It's a very sticky ink. And I don't 100% love how this stamped image turned out, because with the heat embossing, I did lose some detail in the stamped image. You can't really tell that it's supposed to be a pine branch necessarily. Like, you can't see the pine cones in the needles of the pine branch. But I still like how it looks. It looks a little bit like a gold filigree kind of. So I just kind of kept it and went with it. Now, that could be that my embossing powder is not a detailed embossing powder. It's also an old embossing powder. So there's a lot of variables in why this is not as detailed looking when it is heat embossed. but I don't hate it. So I have gone ahead and cut that out with its coordinating die, and I am going to line up my practice panel, and I'm going to create that longer score line, or that longer, the score line for the longer flap. And I am going to go ahead and fold that in half and burnish that fold with my bone folder, and I'm going to put it on, and I still don't like it. There's just, even though the cardstock is the same color, there's just too much leftover cardstock. So I am going to deal with having a small flap on this card. And in the end, it is totally fine. Totally fine, 100% fine. But again, this is my first go round with the stamp set. It's my first attempt at creating this, and I didn't know what it was going to end up like. So in order to make a trifold card, you kind of have to glue two card bases together, and then you have to hide that adhered card base, right? So because I always put a white panel inside my cards for a clean place to write a message, I decided to use a white card panel to hide my seam. So I'm taking this short panel that I have stamped and embossed on, and I'm adding adhesive to everything except the embossed flap side. And I am going to adhere that to the inside flap of this portrait style A2 size card. They were not exactly the same size, so I lined them up in my guillotine trimmer and trimmed them out. And so now I have my little flap on my card, but I need to cover up the seam, and I need to shorten that top flap just a little bit so it lays flat. So now I'm going to cover up the seam, because those two pieces of paper are not the same size, with this white card panel. And I did trim it down just a smidgen as well, so that there was not extra bumps in the seams of the card. And I'm just going to use my double-sided ATG tape runner to put that all together. The white is a little bit wider than the green, so I'm going to put that in my guillotine trimmer again. And I can line up the short side on the edge of the trimmer and then just lop off everything that sticks out. And it's perfect. So now I've got to figure out what to put on the front, because this has gone way off where I thought it was going to go. My initial inclination was actually to stamp that tree in it, but yeah, that's not going to work. So I went back to my card kit stamp set, and I decided I could use the outline of this village, and I'm going to kind of nestle it down into that pine branch. And then I'm going to add the Santa on the card front. And then I looked at some of the other images to decide which ones I wanted to do. And I could also use that kind of jet stream look of stars behind the Santa sleigh. I also needed to decide if I was going to heat emboss these images, and I decided not to. So I've pulled out the stamp set that is the silhouette image of the valley, the town rather. And I am going to also add the Santa Claus on the Santa sleigh and the reindeer. And I'm going to put these into my stamp positioner. See, I thought about using that star, the star swoosh. Decided not to. But I'm going to put the card base in my MISTI, and I will use my MISTI to pick up the stamps, and I will stamp both of those images at the same time. Just got to clean the embossing powder off my foam pad in my MISTI there. A little bit dirty. I'm going to stamp both of these stamps at the same time, but I'm going to stamp these in black, kind of for contrast, but also because I didn't love the lack of detail that I got with my gold embossing powder on the pine branch, and I was a little bit worried about losing the detail on that little town. So I'm going to stamp them in black ink. I will be using my VersaFine Nocturne Black ink. VersaFine Clair. There we go. VersaFine Clair Nocturne Black ink. And I am using this ink because it is almost always my once and done. It is a fabulous ink. It does take a little bit longer to dry, so you have to give yourself a minute, but it is a fabulous ink. It is one of my new favorites, and I use it a lot. So I have my images, I have my flap, but I need two things. I need a sentiment. Is that the right word, sentiment? Yes. And also I need to create another piece that's gold. Like I want to kind of create a frame. So I have picked one of the sentiments. This one says, I think I chose the Happy Holidays or Merry Christmas, I think, and the moon stamp. And I am going to stamp them both at the same time on my card front with, again, my Versamark ink, because I will be heat embossing with gold embossing powder again. My sentiment is not exactly straight, but neither is my Santa Claus, neither is my moon. And to be fair, the typography in the stamp set makes it so it doesn't have to be perfectly straight. I'm going to pull out my heat gun and heat set that embossing powder. And it does create that kind of top-bottom frame once the flap is closed. And I feel like that's a more finished look. It's not at all the card I set out to make. The only thing that is what I set out to make is it has a bottom flap. That's it. And I used this stamp set. That's it. I did think that maybe I could add a little bit more visual interest by doing some ink the front of the card. So I pulled out that Altenew Evergreen ink and a blending brush, and I just kind of went around the edges a little bit. All of that gold embossing powder will resist the ink. Excuse me. And the black ink in the images is darker than the green, so it won't affect that at all. And I am just going to kind of go around the sides and the top and bottom, making it a little bit heavier in the corners and thinner as it goes down the sides and thinner as it goes across the top and bottom, just to create a little bit more depth of color. The ink and the paper are nearly the same color, which is great because they're not the same brand. The ink is Altenew. I think the paper is Stampin' Up. I'm just saying. If they have a green color that's pretty, I buy it because I like all the greens. But I think it's Stampin' Up. All right, I did put a little bit of Post-it tape across the back of the card to keep it clean. And here is my card. I am going to kind of zoom in just a little bit so you can see that close up. And then I have a photograph where you can kind of see the flap on the front taped down so that it photographs just a little bit better. So I hope you like this kind of mishmashy type of project. It was a thing. It was a trial and error kind of thing. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for sticking out to the end. I do have a couple of other videos here for you to watch, as well as the subscribe button. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up, and have a really great day.